Hey everybody. So today what I'd like to do is spend a few minutes talking about C++ input-output, and it's the material that you're going to practice with in lab number 3. So let me bring up lab 3 real quick here. Um, if you look at lab 3, if I just kind of scan through this, you'll see different problems where you have some input data and different lines of code. How does each line of code process in different ways? So this lab's relatively mechanical, meaning that you just need to follow the procedures and note the output. Um, Obviously, it would be best if you, as you note the output, you say, I understand why that happens, or I understand why that happens. Or if you don't, you can say, well, I got this as an answer, but I don't really know why. And by the time we get through this lab, ideally you've made some good progress on input and output. But if we look at this problem number 1, for example, here, um, this line of data, just looking at just a line of data alone doesn't necessarily tell you what types of data types uh, each particular piece of the line is. And so you don't know, for example, if 47 is supposed to be an integer or a floating point number. That's up to the specification of the program. And C++ doesn't do a very good job of doing error checking here. So for example, let's try something. I create a variable that's an integer. I ask for it in input, and then I'm just going to print it out. All right, very basic, right? So when I run this program, if I type 10, it prints out 10. Now, if I type something that's not an integer, notice that it prints out a 0. And by the way, on your computer, you might not get 0. You might get some random number, because this cin command basically did not run successfully, but it also doesn't generate an error. Same thing is true if I do something like that, right? It'll basically, what it does is, starting from the beginning of the line, it reads integer values until it can't, right? So these are basically whole numbers, which by the way also include negative numbers, right? But it can include something like that. It'll just print the 1. So you just have to be cognizant of the fact that C++ won't tell you, hey, I expected this and I got this. It won't give you an error message here. And so as you run through these problems in the lab, you'll get a sense of kind of where you see those vulnerabilities and what you might need to do around error checking, which we're going to learn more in the weeks to come. I will show you one basic version of error checking that I don't think is in an upcoming lab, but it's a good trick to know. And this is basically using this thing called cin good. And we haven't talked about conditional statements yet, right? But basically what I'm saying is, I have this statement called an if statement. I'm saying if whatever comes after the if is true, then I'm going to do what's inside these curly braces. And then I could say else, I'll do what's inside the other curly braces. Okay, this is a typical if-then-else statement. Those of you in my CS160 class, you saw this in Python, very similar, except of course the formatting is a little different. So now let's try this. Type 10, I get 10. So far, so good. I type a negative number, so far, so good. I type a character, and I get the word error. I do 3.0, I get an okay answer, right? So it isn't perfect, right? In other words, if it finds an integer value, even though the rest of the line may have a non-integer value, it still will say it's good. So this is the type of thing you've got to be careful of when you use it. And you'll find that as you get into advanced C++ programming, you create these intricate error checks and versus counting on some of these built-in functions. Okay, so that's a little bit about maybe the background behind some of the early problems in the lab. What I want to do now is I want to walk through problem 9. I think it's problem 9. Let me look. Yeah, problem 9. And what problem 9 is a demonstration of using file input and output. So I just pasted this in here from the lab. All right. So I just pasted in. This is what your problem 9 code looks like. All right. So if we run this program, let's see what happens. I get an error message that says out file is an undeclared identifier. Okay, so let's walk through what we're doing in some of these cases. Right? I've declared in file of a variable type called ifstream, which stands for input file stream. And ifstream, along other things, come with this include fstream library. Fstream stands for file streaming. Okay, so you can see that my error message says, hey, I have out file, but I've not declared it. So we can fix that by declaring it as an OF stream type, which is output file stream. And so we have to be deliberate and say what files are inputs and what files are outputs in C++. Okay, so now when I run it, let's see what happens. What did I do? Oops, I spelled it wrong. OF steam. OF stream. There we go. Let's try that. So now my program ran. It didn't print anything. Okay? And you're saying, well, hold on a second. I see what looks like a print statement. How come it didn't print anything? Well, this basically says to put all of this into the out file stream versus the standard out, right? If I do this, in fact, if I just copy this, cout sends you to the standard output. And in fact, if you mouse over, you can see, it's like I wanted to point with my fingers, but you can't see that. You could see the pop-up box that says STD, that stands for standard out. By default, standard out is your screen, and by default, standard in is your keyboard. You can change that to be files when you want to, but what we're doing here is we're just declaring separate streams called in file and out file. Okay, so the program ran, but we don't know what showed up in the output here. So let's take a look and see what's there. I got to get to my out file, and let me show you how to do that. From your solution here on the right, if you right-click on Sandbox, or whatever your project name is, mine's called Project Sandbox, go down near the bottom, you see Open Folder and File Explorer. Here's where your programs are. You know how to do this because you've found your source code to upload to the D to L, and here's your output.dat. So now I bring up a notepad window and I can just left click and drag to my notebook, and you can see this is what I get. I get this error, or not error, sum equals some negative number. Your value will probably be different. Why is this? It's because num1 and num2, nothing in file doesn't point to anything. And therefore, when I grab num1 and num2 from this file stream, I just get random data. So what we need to do here is we basically have to open an actual data file. Okay, now we got to actually make the data file. So now let's see what happens if I run this. Okay, same thing, basically same results. Okay, there is no input data file, so we need to create one. I'm just gonna do this. Okay, now I want to pull this in, and I want to give it 2 numbers, right? So I'll save that. Now I'll go ahead and run this. Open the file, bring up Notepad, pull output to Notepad, and there we go, sum equals 300. So that worked. Okay, so there's two things we've done so far. We declared the output file. We specified an input file name and opened that. And the only other thing we're missing is, this is good hygiene, to close files when you're done using them. And then now our program works great. So in some of these later programs in this class, you are going to open input data files, you're going to write to output data files, and the same thing will apply. If you don't put a directory path here, if you just say file name here in quotes, it's going to put it where your source code is. And that's probably what you want to do. You could, of course, be more specific, and you can say C/, you could put a path here. I don't want you to do that, because that means your program will work on your computer, but it will not work on my computer. So don't modify these directories unless I tell you otherwise. Okay, so that's some basics of file input and output here. As always, post questions on the discussion board around Lab 3. Lab 3 will take you a while. Again, it's mostly mechanical, but it should lead to a bunch of learning around how C++ handles input and output.